Hello, it's Mr. Movie Mountain here, and today we'll be getting twisted with some twisters. I will be comparing the 1996 hit Twister, starring Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt, to this year's standalone sequel Twisters, starring Glenn Powell and Daisy Edgar Jones. Let's get into it, but first I'm just going to put a spoiler warning here. For both of these movies, I'll be explaining them in depth. Not sure if you need a spoiler warning for a movie that's about 30 years old, but I'll go ahead and give it anyway. Alright, so Twister. I'll just start by saying the main protagonist, Bill, is a total butthead.
Hey, butthead!
Okay, there you go. We have it. Review over. I'm just kidding. Let's get into the synopsis. In the opening scene, Brad comes up to a storm chaser group to get his estranged wife, Jo, to sign some divorce papers. And it turns out he brought with him his fiance, who he's trying to marry and get the divorce finalized so he can go do that. While doing this, he gets sucked back into storm chasing because they're about to test his invention, the Dorothy. Then they go on a series of tornado chases, dragging along his fiance, who's getting traumatized along the way. We also find out at this time that Bill has some sort of sixth sense for tornadoes, almost like a supernatural ability to find out where they're going. A tornado whisperer, if you will. The group bumps into Jonas, who's a competing scientist but backed by evil corporate interests. And he has a technology similar to the Dorothy, and now it's a race to see who can be the first to measure a tornado and develop an early warning system to help out towns be prepared for when these twisters come rolling through. And I'll just say this film was shot mostly on location in Oklahoma, which was something unique and that the director insisted on, which I think was a nice touch for the movie. Then as they're going around trying to measure tornadoes, we get this iconic scene where there's a cow that flies past the car, and then maybe another cow or the same cow flies back again. Just peak cinema right there.
I gotta go, Julia. We got cows.
After being severely traumatized, Bill's fiance finally dumps him. He doesn't seem to really care because he's been totally obsessed with chasing these tornadoes and trying to get back together with Jo. I mean, Bill just really sucks. Then we finally hit the climax of the movie. There's a giant tornado barreling down on everyone. Jonas and his crew get tossed away and are presumably dead. And you have Jo and Bill against the storm. Jo has to face her childhood fears and trauma in this final storm. They get Dorothy to go off, they get the measurements they need and hunker down and survive. And then we have, the final scene where Bill and Jo have their huge romantic kiss and presumably live happily ever after.
Gross.
Here's what worked for me about the movie. The tornadoes were genuinely scary and, state-of-the-art technology for that time. The cow scene is iconic and hilarious. And then the ensemble cast, had some really good performers in it and honestly some pretty fun moments along the way. Now, what didn't work for me so much is, as I mentioned before, Bill just sucked as a protagonist, and I had a really hard time rooting for him to get back with Jo or to stay with his fiance or really anything positive. Also, the writing and character progression in general with all the characters was a little shaky, and this might seem like a small thing, but they never explained why Jonas's corporate interests were bad or who his corporate interests were. I mean, who is sponsoring this guy? The Tornado Fencing Company? So credit where credit is due. When this movie came out in 1996, it was a total hit, raking in about $500 million at the box office, which was the second highest that year. It also was nominated for 2 Oscars in visual and sound design, and was the first feature film to be sold on DVD. Normally something like this with groundbreaking CGI, a fun ensemble cast, and a weakish plot would get a 3.5 for me, but really Bill just did it in, and it's gonna get a 2.5 out of 5 on the Mountain Meter. Now let's talk about Twisters. If you can feel it, chase it.
If you feel it, chase it!
Glen Powell, the capybara, is back. In a traumatic opening sequence, our main hero, Kate, played by Daisy Edgar Jones, loses her group of friends in a storm while they were trying to complete an experiment that she had of releasing diaper filling to collapse a tornado. The movie then cuts 5 years into the future. Kate's working in New York, and her old friend Javi, who was the only other survivor from the incident, comes to visit her and invite her to come back to Oklahoma and help with his new tornado measuring company. When we get to Oklahoma, we meet Javi's team that's full of highly educated doctors from prestigious schools around the country, very professional. And then as they're filling up at a gas station, we get the hotshot YouTubers riding in, and we're introduced to Glen Powell's character, Tyler, who is a tornado wrangler. He sells t-shirts, just about as obnoxious as you can get. And so immediately we're set up with this dynamic of, real professional scientists trying to do work to help out, and hotshot YouTubers who are just taking advantage of the spectacle of the storms to make money by selling merch and making videos for their followers. Tyler immediately seems to take a liking to Kate, and there's a scene where they're at a gas station, and we find out what we kind of had a sneaking suspicion of already, that Kate has a tornado sixth sense. She picks up a dandelion and lets it go into the wind to tell where the next tornado is going to be. But as Tyler's making his flirtatious advances, he repeatedly gets shut down because, he's just a Chad YouTuber.
It's every day, bro, with the Disney Channel flow.
After a few tornado run-ins, Kate finally agrees to go out with Tyler, and they head to a rodeo. At this rodeo, there's a giant tornado that comes through all of the sudden, and Tyler and Kate have to hunker down and barely survive. Right after this storm, we find out that, dun dun dun, Javi's company is backed by this real estate mogul Snake, who's swooping in and buying properties that are destroyed by the storm at a discount price and flipping them for a profit. While Tyler and his crew are selling merch, it turns out, so that they can give food to the victims of the tornadoes. Expectations subverted. Kate then runs off to her childhood home, is able to reconnect with things that she had going on in college, her experiment. Tyler shows up. The mom insists that he stays, and so they have some connection. And he finally encourages her to give the experiment another try. Time to let the diapers on the loose again. There are a few more tornado chases. They make some adjustments to the experiment thanks to, the brains of Tyler and Kate working together now. And that brings us to the pinnacle of the movie, the giant storm scene. So there's this huge fiery tornado bearing down on a nearby town. Tyler, Kate, and his crew race off to warn the town and help people take shelter. And you have Javi, who's conflicted, where his crew is telling him they need to go measure this tornado. We don't care about the townspeople. and he completes his redemption arc by ditching his crew and racing off to the town to help as well. They pack most of the townspeople into a movie theater that clearly is not going to hold up during the storm, and Kate has to go full action hero mode, driving her somewhat untested experiment straight into the storm to try and stop it alone. She's able, through a very intense last sequence, to deploy her experiment and kill the tornado. Everyone is safe. They cut to an airport scene where Javi is dropping off Kate and Tyler's there to say goodbye. There's some tension, but she ultimately walks away, and then he goes in to chase after her in the airport, and we end with the most romantic not kiss. Here's what worked for me in this movie. The storm scenes were genuinely scary. Every time I was worried for everyone on screen. It could have just been because I saw it in a premium format, but they really did those monstrous tornadoes justice. I also loved the subversion of expectations. I was totally bought into the douchey YouTuber in Glenn Powell, but I feel like he had a really nice arc of rooting against him to rooting for him and Kate. There were a couple scenes in the movie that were more vibey and kind of showing off the beauty of Oklahoma. I've only been to Oklahoma once, so I don't know much about it, but I enjoyed those scenes of kind of showing off some of the local scenery. Then, in the final scene of the movie, there's a cameo from Paul Scheer. What more could you ask for? Here are some things that didn't really work for me. They kept calling Kate City Girl, although she obviously had a Midwestern accent the whole movie. Some of the science really strained credulity at times. There were a few times where it seemed a bit long, and I mean, there was no cow flying past the camera, so what are you gonna do? If you couldn't already tell, I enjoyed Twisters a lot more than the original Twister movie. And it's much more than just the obvious advances in technology during that time. It has more to do with the plot and stakes of the movie. Like I said, my primary complaint with Twister was Bill Paxton's character just really having a hard time rooting for the guy and not really understanding, why they decided to make the protagonist so unlikable, which wasn't a problem in this new one. Like I said before, I really think Glenn Powell gave a great performance. Daisy Edgar Jones was amazing. I could feel the chemistry between them, and they really had me rooting for them by the end. And this is a small thing, but in the second movie, explaining why the corporate interests were evil, I think just added to the stakes of the movie and made it make more sense to me. It wasn't a perfect movie, but I think it really worked as a classic summer action flick, and I would highly recommend going to see it. For all those reasons, I've got to give Twisters a 4 out of 5 on the Mountain Meter. Really good movie. I had a really fun time. Twister spun through my mind so that Twisters could pirouette into my heart. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.